actions that are requiring you to be still. Do not spoil these quiet hours by wishing them away, waiting impatiently to be active again. Some of the greatest works in my kingdom have been done from sick beds and prison cells. Instead of resenting the limitations of a weakened body, search for my way in the midst of these very circumstances. Limitations can be liberating, and then their strongest desire for living close to me.
Amen. Thank you for that, Jack. I appreciate that.
You forgot me, Scott.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bonnie. Bonnie asked me if she could have some time. By all means, go right ahead.
Just a couple of minutes. This is the coffee list, so please sign up. No sign up, no coffee. So.
That wasn't a couple of minutes. That was a couple of seconds. That's my kind of announcement. Short, sweet, to the point. Unlike me. All right. With that, we've had some fun so far these past couple of weeks talking about, Revelation, the overview, what we're going to be doing in heaven, which is going to be singing. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts they want to share right now over what we discussed last week or maybe the week before? Very well. Yeah, well, things kind of go a little bit south starting today. So the fun and games is going to be over for the next couple of weeks or so. And so before we get into that, this is going to be our primary focus of discussion this morning. But before we get into that, I just want to do a brief reminder of not only why do we study the Bible, but in particular, why do I stand up front of here and actually discuss the Bible with you. And if you think about it, why do we study the Bible? There are three foundational things I would strongly suspect every one of us in this room knows, but these are the three foundational things. We're sinners. Christ died and rose again as the final payment for our sin. He served as our final sacrifice. Salvation is His free gift. For those of you that were in church this morning, you already heard in the epistle lesson. You'll hear it in Paul in Romans 10:9. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. Literally, that is all we really need to know about the Bible. Because if we know these things, then that kind of makes Bible study almost, I don't want to say useless, but what we can do is we can almost start adding things on. We can almost start making this more confusing than it needs to be. I try my absolute hardest to make this as simple and as clear as I possibly can in everything that I do. If we know these three things, then we study the Bible to see how those parts of the Bible fit in to these particular things. We read the Old Testament to understand what sin is and how it occurred. We read the New Testament to find out why Christ had to come, what He did. And we read the epistles to find out what we're supposed to do with that life. So I just want to give that brief review, why I teach Bible studies, and really why when I'm teaching Revelation, I'm trying very hard not to get lost in the details, because that's not the important thing. The important thing to remember as we study Revelation is simply that it's going to happen, and we need to be ready when it's going to be happening. If we know these things right here, that's all the readiness we'll ever need for when that time comes. Last, I've been referencing the signs of the end. And this comes from a book that I bought when Jerome and I did the first class in 2004. And it's a book by Tim LaHaye and somebody else. And Tim LaHaye is one of the co-authors of the Left Behind books. And this is his descriptions of the signs of the end of the age. Some of these may come as news to you. You may not recognize these. The formation of Israel. The rise of Russia, because as we're going to read later in Revelation that the armies are going to come from the east. And so that's why the rise of Russia is a pretty big deal. In particular, the overthrow of Nicholas in 1917. Labor conflict. Increase in travel and knowledge. Apostasy, which is simply false teaching. Not just mistaken teaching. I'm going to make mistakes from time to time up here. There's no getting around it. Everybody that preaches is going to make a mistake someplace or another, because what is theology? It's man's definition of God. By definition, it's going to be wrong someplace. That's us defining God. That's like the insect defining me. It can't be done. And so at some point I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to make errors. An error is one thing. An apostasy is a false teaching. It's knowing what is right and deliberately going the absolute wrong direction. Occultism. I listen to sports radio quite a bit every day. And this sports radio station for a long time has been advertising adult entertainment clubs. But all of a sudden I've noticed those ads seem to have disappeared from the airwaves, and I've heard a new one. I've heard an ad for a lady that will go ahead and tell me my future if I call in and pay her the low price of 99 cents a minute. And I was like going, seriously? Those people have always been around, but now they're advertising? It's gotten to that point now? So occultism, it's out there. Scoffers. An apostate knows they're saying the wrong thing. A scoffer, I don't know which one. Actually, I shouldn't say I don't know which one. I really despise both. A scoffer is a person that laughs at God. I highly recommend you don't laugh at God. It doesn't typically turn out well for you in the Bible when you do that. But those are the people out there that try to tell you that God doesn't exist, that God doesn't care, that God's a woman, whatever the case may be. Moral breakdown. I hope somebody will tell me when that happens. I'm not sure I'll be able to recognize it when it occurs. One world church. And one world government. One world church, as long as there's Lutherans on the world, you don't need to worry about one world church, because us Lutherans can't get along with each other anyway. We're going to have as many branches out there as there are. I looked it up a while back. You've got your three main divisions. You've got, obviously, the ELCA, which is the largest, has approximately 9 million members. Missouri Synod, we're about half the size. We have about 4.5 million members, and that's in the United States. We have the Wisconsin Synod. I don't know their numbers. I'm just going to peg it at 1 million. I'm also going to throw out something I just saw yesterday that my wife and I ate across the river, and we saw St. Paul Lutheran Church. She goes, "You know that church?" I go, "No." She goes, "What's that behind it?" I go, "I don't know. It looks like a daycare or something like that." And no, St. Paul Lutheran Church is a Wisconsin Synod Lutheran church with a K-8 school. Anybody know this?
They've had for years and years and
I had no clue. I had absolutely no. I didn't know it was there to start with. I do track every ELCA and LCMS church within about a 100-mile radius on all sorts of metrics. I don't track Wisconsin Synod churches. For those of you that recall, Gethsemane Lutheran out on Jersey Ridge used to be Wisconsin Synod. They went ELCA. I'm sure that went well. But yeah, that's kind of going from here to here.
Yes, it was.
One big old jump there. So I would have loved to have been in on those voters' meetings. But no, as long as we've got Lutherans, we don't need to worry about one Lutheran church. There's probably about 30 different sects of Lutheranism out there. Some as small as one little church, because, man, us Germans and us Swedes, I got a little bit of both in me.
Yeah.
One thing we can agree on is we don't have to agree with anybody unless we have to. And so if we got something to fight about, we're going to find it. One world government, one thing you will notice as time goes on, government does get bigger. I mean, technology allows it, and all sorts of things work so that you don't need the layers of government that you necessarily needed before. We see it in business just as well. You don't necessarily need the middle layers of management that used to exist back in the day because, quite frankly, productivity gains in computers have rendered them useless. So when we talk about signs of the end, and your friends say, well, I'll just wait till I see, well, there's a lot of these things happening today, ladies and gentlemen. And we're going to be jumping into those a little bit more as we get into that. So as we start out, we'll take back just a brief little jump back into Revelation 5, verse 9. And that is where it was written, they, the multitudes in heaven, sang a new song. You're worthy to take the scroll and open its seals because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased men for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. So they broke the seals. Well, that's not necessarily a good thing, because once you break the seals, then you got to see the seal judgments. David, I didn't expect to see you with us today. When did you get back?
About midnight last night.
Oh, okay. So I guess you really just got back. Okay. Man, talk about a surprise. I did not expect to see you. So welcome back to David.
Thank you.
From lovely San Juan and warmer weather than we have here. We hear about the Lamb a lot in the Bible. And these are the mentions, and these are simply the mentions that you're going to find in the New Testament. or in Revelation, and I adapted this from a table that was in my Halley's Bible Handbook. You're going to find 190 mentions of the Lamb in the Bible. And you're going to find 150 of them are in the Old Testament, and they're talking about the sacrificial lamb, the lamb that you're actually going to take and sacrifice on the given feasts and sacrifices in that. But there's a couple that are a little bit different. For example, you go to Isaiah 53:7, which we're going to hear sometime during this season of Lent. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, because Isaiah 53 is quite clearly the depiction of Christ's death and resurrection. Jeremiah gets into it a little bit. I have been like a gentle lamb led to the slaughter. I did not realize that they had plotted against me. So those are a handful of the Old Testament references that actually refer to a lamb allegorically instead of as a true lamb. Now, of our New Testament references, of which we've got about 40 New Testament references, we've got two. One in Mark, one in Luke, that talk about the Passover lamb that was actually used in the Last Supper. You got Luke, who used the term lamb twice. Once in the book of Luke and once in the book of Acts. Peter and Paul once referred to lamb. The other 34 times, 34 of the 40, were used by John. 3 in his gospel, and the other 31 in the book of Revelation. I only threw 16 of them up here. So when you talk about lamb, the Lamb of God, words that we sing almost every Sunday at some point or another. We certainly sing it prior to going to communion. Lamb of God, take away the sin of the world. That was John's almost unique term for Christ. He's about the only person that was using that term, lamb. And now we start getting into the seals. Revelation 6, verses 1 and 2. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying in the thunder, "Come!" And I looked, and there before me was a white horse. His rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. Well, I would think a conqueror would be bent on conquest, but this is conquest. Go back to Matthew 24, verses 4 and 5. This is the very beginning of Christ's last great discourse with the people prior to his crucifixion, the Olivet Discourse. Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name claiming I am the Christ and will deceive many." So this white horse is not necessarily war. We're not absolved for war, but he's not necessarily war. He's white for a reason. What do we think of when we think of the word white? What is white?
Purity.
Purity is exactly the word I'm looking for. He is not pure. He looks pure. He is a false Christ. So this is a person that comes here that is going to be an apostate. That is going to be actually telling us the wrong things that we need to do, the wrong things that we need to believe. Because once he's lulled us into a sense of security, that's when the red horse comes in. Revelation 6, 3 and 4. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And then on the horse came out a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. What do we think of when we think of a crimson red like this? Bloodshed, absolutely. So we've got bloodshed. Luckily, we don't have war in this earth right now. I adapted this from Wikipedia. It's not even told. I want you to think. Just think recently of all the wars that kind of come to your mind. Do you notice anything unique in this list?
The Afghan Civil War is not going to end.
Probably not. Well, it's Civil War. Civil War is hard to end.
It's not here. Odd years.
All in this century. This is only in this century. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. I want you to think about this, and I want you to think about the number of people that died in these wars. And just think what you're thinking. And see if it matches up with this. Depending on how this is calculated, and I really don't know, The low end of this is 70 million people. The high end of this is 170 million people. These are deaths. This does not include injuries. This does not include casualties. If we expand this to 2,000 years, say just the last 2,000 years, and I have that data, this number becomes about 230 to 500 million people. Our current Earth's population is about 7 billion people right now. So you're looking at somewhere war in the last 2,000 years has killed already about 8% of our population. And that is war. I don't include things that are termed as genocides, which includes things like the Holocaust. That accounts for anywhere from another 23 to 150 million people. I don't include things like pogroms, which is what the Soviet Union was doing after World War II, which is what Mao was doing in China during the Cultural Revolution. That includes between 8 and 64 million people. I don't include prison camps, which goes from about 3 to 6 million people. I don't include human sacrifice, which they estimate, I hope human sacrifice is pretty much gone by now, but back in the good old days when it was practiced, they estimate between 300,000 and 1.5 million people. I don't include the war on unborn children that claims about 1 million children each year in this country and about another 40 million in the world alone. So I don't include the 40 million that have died in this country and the 40 million a year worldwide for I don't know how long, for a number that makes me sick every time I stop and think about it. So when we talk about deaths, it's already happening. There's already a lot of death around us. Aren't you glad you came today? Aren't you sure you're not coming next week? Matthew 24:6. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Whoa. I don't know how my parents got through World War II. I know there's several of you that lived through it. My dad, I'm pretty sure Pearl Harbor was December 7th, and I'm reasonably certain he enlisted on December 8th. He was obviously not alone in that regard. I'm sure there's any number of people in here that can tell a very similar story. And he was gone. He was never in danger. That's the amazing thing. I mean, he was in danger of getting sunburnt in Mexico because he was posted in Central America and he was doing weather forecasting in that. But other people that were in the theaters, you know, wherever they were, whether they were flying the hump, which I believe Marge's husband was doing, whether they were in Europe or they're in Africa or whatever the case may be, to do that for 5 years. And you see this death toll, 41 to 73 million people. How could you not think that the world was coming to an end, especially when this was hard on the heels of the war to end all wars? And it ended all wars for about 20 years. This is what's been. What Revelation is telling us is we need to be prepared because it could actually get worse. I only throw this up here just to kind of show you when we talk about these things, we take these numbers so for granted. I mean, I don't know how many of us really are aware of these numbers or think. I don't suggest you think about them very much on a daily basis. I mean, that could almost just make you not want to get out of bed. But when you look at that in terms of just really what our population is, we only crossed the human population threshold of 1 billion people around the 1800s. And then you see it starts growing right around the 60s, because right around here, you had two concurrent things that happened. The first thing you had was the development of the Green Revolution by a guy, an Iowa State agronomist by the name of Norman Borlaug. And what he did was he was able to develop new crops that were resistant to bugs, to pests, and to other things. They grew better. They had greater yields. And so we were able to take care of starvation in many ways. I'm going to come back to starvation in a moment. And the second thing is you had the pharmaceutical industry really start the development of antibiotics. And once you start developing antibiotics, things that were killing people before, polio, tuberculosis, pneumonia, things like that, they stopped, they didn't kill people as readily. Flu outbreaks, like the great Spanish flu back here that could kill people. You can see that so clearly almost when antibiotics started becoming pretty widespread, because that's a pretty severe inflection point right here. People that used to die just weren't dying anymore. And now what has most demographers kind of curious is what happens in the future. And you talk to the Malthusians, the people that believe that doom and gloom are right around the corner. They believe in this line right here. That one doesn't work either. Whatever. They believe in this line. That's probably not going to be the case. Some people believe in this line right here. I think that's overly optimistic. What is happening is that birth rates worldwide, for the most part, are starting to decrease. Demographers believe the human population is going to top out somewhere in around 40 to 50 years at about 9 billion people, and then it's going to plateau. I'm sure you came to Bible study to hear that. The third seal. Now we're back to famine. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. And then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's wages, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine." By all means, leave the wine alone. Down with that. What do these numbers mean? My Haley's box suggests that a quart of wheat for a day's wages is about 8 times the regular price. So that would be, along the lines of, what's a loaf of bread going for now? $1.29, $1.50, whatever like that. That would be a loaf of bread going for 15 times 8, whatever that number is, $12. I think you'd notice that. That would be like, our gasoline has gone up about 50 cents a gallon just in the past week or so ago. I'm not exactly sure why world oil prices are actually going down a little bit. I think there might be a refinery offline. Another way to put this, we're looking at 800% inflation in food prices. And so when you have that kind of inflation, when food goes from being valued at this price to this price, well, now you're going to have shortages. Now you're going to have people fighting over it. That's where you're going to actually start getting a famine. And this is where I'm going to return back to a little bit. These are famine events, and this I am going back to about 1300 or so. When we talk about famine in this day and age, we almost look at it, most of us probably think naturally, we go back to this, the Great Irish Potato Famine. That's what brought a lot of the Irish people here in the mid-1800s. There was famines all the way through here because a lot of things can happen. You can overfarm the land, you can have too much population, and all that good stuff like that. Malthus put forth his theory right around here, and his theory is very simple, is that population increases geometrically, and yet food only increases arithmetically. So this is food production, this is population increase, and all he saw was this constant increase between the two. Our decreasing birth rate and our increasing technology, for the most part, have made Malthus not true. Malthus has some very small-scale cases where it can occur. But you see, there's still famine going on today. Bangladesh, I remember that as a kid. There was a very famous concert for Bangladesh, spearheaded by Eric Clapton, George Harrison, a bunch of other people. Ethiopia had famine. This says 30 years ago. I thought it was even more recent than that. North Korean famine, as far as I'm concerned, that's still going on. Because North Korea is just a mess. And they've been isolated from the world, they do it on their own, and as a result, they have a shortage of food there. This goes back to the most important thing when it comes to famine. In this day and age, I didn't bother to tell you how many people died of these things. I didn't total up this number, I'm just going to call it somewhere between another 100 million and 200 million people gone. Do we know? Did we recognize it at the time? In this day and age, primarily because of Borlaug's work, but also because of others, there is no reason for famine to increase in the earth. Famine on this planet right now is mainly a failure of politics. It is mainly a failure of people. They'll either allow the food in and it gets diverted, which is a nice term for stolen, or it gets wasted. But there is enough, I don't even know how much cropland we're losing in the United States, although we're getting it back because ethanol is raising the corn prices, and so that's bringing cropland back into production. But where I live right now was a farm 15 years ago. and somebody decided that, and it was worth more as residential property than it was as farmland. It probably still is even today. But there is no reason, the only reason why there is starvation anywhere in this world, and that includes this country, it's a failure. We have enough food. It's getting it to the right place. And I'm not going to say logistics is simple, because it's not. But the world can produce enough food. There's absolutely nothing stopping it from doing that. A quarter of the earth dead. Well, how can that be? Well, you got the famines that I showed you, and you got the wars that I showed you. Revelation 6, 7, and 8. When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and the plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So those guys were sent out, and this particular horse enabled it to occur. It's it could be happening before our very eyes right now. Let's go ahead and jump into our discussions a little bit. These judgments, war, famine, unrest, do you think we'd recognize them when we saw them? Why not?
Yes and no.
Part of life.
It does seem that way, doesn't it?
That's the way I approached the four horses was, you know, each of them is unfortunately a part of life.
That's an excellent point. It's part of life and sin. That's the way life goes. And so when people say, you know, I mean, these judgments start, I guess I better start paying attention. There is a very real chance. I could be wrong. Keep that, of anything I ever say, anytime I'm in front of you, keep those 4 words in front of you at all times. I could be wrong. I am not infallible. I am not the ultimate authority on these things. It could very well be that the predispensational millennialists are correct and that my interpretation is wrong, in which case, so what? It doesn't really matter. But what if I'm right? What if these judgments are already occurring right now? And it probably would behoove us to be prepared for those judgments, would it not? I don't believe I'm speaking any knowledge to anybody in this room that doesn't already know that. Our job, of course, is to make sure that we take this, that we share it with those people that we know. The thing that I pretty much pray at the end of every prayer that I take, and that I take whatever knowledge Jesus has imparted into me, and that He gift me with the ability to figure out who to give it to and how to do it. Go back to some of Jesus' sayings in Matthew 24. No one knows the day or the hour. You always need to be prepared. Anybody remember off the top? I already kind of gave it away. Who was Jesus speaking to when He was talking? Was He talking to His disciples? He was talking to the people. It was a crowd. It was a crowd. It wasn't just His 12 disciples around Him. It wasn't a small group of teachers or anything like that. He was talking to the people. Why do you think Jesus would spend close to 2 chapters talking about the end of the world?
Because it's going to happen.
Because it's going to happen.
He came to save the world.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted them to be ready.
Be ready.
Be ready. Is absolutely. All these answers are correct, but yes, they needed to be ready. Why do they need to be ready? I would strongly suggest it's because they're going to be here to live it. If you go back to what I said, one of the elements of predispensationalism suggests the very real possibility in that line of thinking that the church will be taking from earth into heaven, that we will not live these events.
Those people, it didn't happen. The people He's talking to, it didn't happen
That's true.
when they were there.
It didn't happen to them as a group, but it happened to each and every one of them individually. They all ended up meeting their Lord at some point or another.
Okay.
But it is a valid point. You're absolutely right. That is very true. It's going to happen to all of us. Sometimes it's going to happen to us individually. It may happen to all of us together. We'll have to see how that shakes out. I don't know how that's going to work out. All I do know is that God has given me everything I need to know to be ready for when that time comes. I know that for a fact. Any other comments or thoughts on this?
And that's our time is short. Our time is short here to do something about it.
It's always short. Our time is always short. I think I've stunned everybody into silence so far today. But and I had a pretty real chance that I was going to be doing that. And if I haven't stunned you into silence, well, those are the good judgments. Let's get down to the bad stuff, you know. That does get worse. And keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, there are 3 series of 7 judgments. They all get progressively worse. So these are the best of the bad. David's going to give us a brief respite next week when we talk about the seven churches. The next week after that, I'm going to take you to the next worst of the bad. And then however it shakes out between the two of us, we've got the last ones, which will be the worst of the bad. Revelation 6, 9 to 11. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who have been slain because of the word of God and testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been was completed. I never really thought about the last part of verse 11. The number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been, their fellow Christians. They're going to be killed. They're going to be martyred. So that reinforces to me that we always need to be ready, because we could very well, it would be nice if Jesus would just rapture us away from all of this. I think all of us probably pray for that every night. You know, if that be God's will, so be it. But that's just not the promise that he's telling us. There are going to be some of us that are going to be around, are going to have to live through these things. How many of us in this class go, "How long? How long, O Lord? How long?" And what do we say how long for? Probably not something as important as this. We're probably talking about something a little bit more trivial for the most part. But think about it. You're the 11 disciples. You're the countless number of saints that gave their life for Christ, going back to antiquity up until, even recent times. What are you thinking when you gave your life for this man and you see what's going on this earth today? Yes, I think you would be going, "Come on, let's get it done." I understand that, but they have the right to do that. They actually gave their life. I have a hard time saying what I've done is a tribulation in my life so far. If it is, I don't recognize it as such. We're spoiled in this country. I'm happy that we're spoiled in this country. I'd like to stay that way, quite frankly. We're spoiled in this country because we're blessed in this country. We're blessed to have freedom. We're blessed to not have a tyrannical government that is going to put its boot on our necks every time we try to worship our God in the manner in which we please. But when we have that type of blessing, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we don't take that blessing for granted and that we use that blessing as much as we possibly can. I touched on some of these a couple weeks ago. I was reading my Haley's book. It said there was 10 persecutions of the church, of the early church. Well, anytime I see a number that specific, I go, well, I should be able to research that, and lo and behold, I was able to do that. So this took up, almost 3 seconds of Wikipedia search. I described the first 3 in the first week. Nero, as I said at that time, executed Peter and Paul. I think Timothy also might have been martyred during Nero's reign. Nero was a complete idiot. Domitian was the emperor during the time of John. He, if he didn't institute the concept of emperor worship, he ramped it up, or I should say ramped it up again significantly, so that people were supposed to worship him as a god. You know, and if they did not worship him as a deity, then they were going to be executed. Kind of going back to Hadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were supposed to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar. If they didn't, they're going to be thrown in the fiery furnace. Trajan comes a little bit after John. And then we've got a couple of other ones here that keep on going. You know, we just have various persecutions. They bubble up. Things get boring in the Roman Empire. Every now and then, you got to find an enemy to pick on. So why not pick on the Christians? They haven't been picked on in about 20 years or so. So that goes on for a while, all the way up until Constantine becomes the emperor in 306. And even he took a sweet old time. He didn't get rid of Christianity until 313. And then he established Sunday worship in 321. And then when we do the Nicene Creed every Sunday or every other Sunday, he was the one that convened the Council of Nicaea in 325. So that is where we get our Nicene Creed. That's where the people that got together and actually put the foundational beliefs, our creedal beliefs, in the church. Because there were schisms all over the place. You know, we had all over, people thought this, people thought that, people thought that. And so he brought all these people together so they could lay down the foundation of what Christianity was, what Christ was. And that's why we continue to use those creeds to this day. Because everything has to have a solid foundation. If we don't have a solid foundation, we obviously know good things are probably not going to happen. The persecution didn't end there. There's Christians being persecuted today. I described the persecution that still happens in Turkey today. It appears to have been relaxed a little bit since 2004, but they're still being persecuted. Christianity is under fire in much of the Middle East. In many of the totalitarian regimes like North Korea, I don't know if it's outwardly banned as opposed to just severely harassed. We are not under, I don't know how to put it in the United States. All I will say is we don't have overt government interference with how we worship. That's why it saddens me when I see the number of people that are in worship, because it's not the government that's preventing them. It is their own laziness and apathy that is preventing them from worship. When there are people throughout this world that would literally, well, have given their lives and would give great sacrifices to do that which we do each and every Sunday, that part, I will say, that makes me sad. Because that is, when I say that we Americans are lazy, that's really what it comes down to. We take our freedoms for granted, and there's really no good excuse for that. Back to Jesus on the Olivet Discourse. You will be handed over to be persecuted and be put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. That seems to have come true. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. So that's Jesus reinforcing the words. We're going to have to live through this. Some Christians at some time in history are going to have to live through this. And how we live through that is going to be the primary mark of our character. The sixth seal, signs in the heaven. Sun, moon, stars. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and stars fell from the sky. Stars fell from the sky? What's up with that? That's crazy talk. You can't have stars falling from the sky. I have no idea what's up. Oh, that's right. That happened Friday. Silly me. How did I overlook that? For those of you that know me well, first, I apologize for that. And secondly, I have many interests, one of which is astronomy. And so I pay attention to these things. So I was doing some reading up on this particular event on Friday. Does anybody know the size of this particular object that caused this to occur over Russia?
Instead of us.
150 pounds.
150 feet wide and about 10 tons.
No, that's the other one. This one was the size of a refrigerator.
Okay, keep in mind, we did have two events that happened on Friday. Event one was an asteroid. Now, I'll come back to an asteroid in a moment here. You're going to get a little education in astrophysics that you weren't counting on this morning. So, I don't just do the Bible. The number I came across is that it was 49 feet in diameter. And so, I don't know if this thing actually struck Earth. I don't believe it did. And if it did, it wasn't 49 feet in diameter, I'll tell you that much. It would have been shrunk down to something about that
Pieces
size.
of it did hit the earth.
I don't think, pardon? Pieces of it did, okay.
Yeah.
So then it broke apart. Okay, that's what I was not positive about. But it was not a 49-foot piece of rock that hit the earth. A 49-foot piece of rock hit the earth, that would be bad news. Bad news. 49 feet. And the way this thing did its thing, it wasn't because that piece of rock hit the earth. It was because it had a blast wave that it put in front of it. So it put this wave out in front of it, and that's what broke all the windows and did the damage that it did in Russia. When we dropped the atomic bombs in Nagasaki, those bombs did not land on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. If they had, the damage would have been much less because the earth would have eaten much of that impact. Those detonated, I want to say, about a mile above the earth. And so it was that blast wave that flattened everything. And that was Nagasaki and Hiroshima. If we actually launched a nuclear warhead today and it detonated, you're looking at a blast radius of probably somewhere in the 12 to 20 mile range is my guess, something along the lines like that. And I'm talking total flattening of everything around there. Stars falling from the sky, I'll believe in that Revelation stuff when I see that happening. Stars fall from the sky every day, ladies and gentlemen. If you go out at night, Jerome and I do this every now and then, you can look and see little... well, you can do two things. You can see the satellites. There's tables out there that'll tell you when you can see a satellite go across the earth. And you can also see little meteorites that just flash. And they're just little flashes, just little right there. Certain times of the year, you're going to have a meteor shower. You'll have a good one in November. You've got another good one, the Perseids, in August. These are just little bits of leftover comets that have rotated around the sun, and we just go through their path. And these are seriously, I mean, sand-sized types of things. But when you got a sand-sized piece of material traveling at 25,000 miles an hour, well, it's going to make that flash that's visible from about 20,000 feet away, 20,000 miles away. So to those people that really think that they're just going to wait until these signs start occurring, they're already happening. To him who has ears, let him hear. To him that has eyes, let him see. It's happening. All these things are happening. They've been happening for quite some time. 20 cents worth of astrophysics. We had two things. We had that little piece of a meteorite that hit Russia Friday night, Friday, whatever, almost the same time as when we had the near miss. And near is only in astronomical terms. It was 18,000 miles away, that asteroid from Earth. I mean, 18,000 miles, that's about the same as the Earth's diameter. It's well inside the moon, Earth radius of about 250,000 miles. It's close, but it's not that close. And they knew that it was not going to happen, and those two events were not related. One did not have anything to do with the other. And so when we've got the near-miss thing, it came from the asteroid belt. And the asteroid belt happens right outside around the orbit of Mars. Between Mars and Jupiter, you've got the asteroid belt. It's a protoplanet that never developed, primarily because of the gravitational forces of Jupiter. And so those are just bits of rock. Every now and then, something nudges them. They'll go in orbit around the sun in a strange little orbit. They're not on the same ecliptic plane as the rest of the planets. And those things occasionally hit Earth. It happens. But it hasn't happened for quite some time. And if one of those hit Earth, if that thing that was 18,000 miles away had hit Earth, that could have been very, very bad. And that thing, I had the size, maybe it's on my next slide. Yeah, we'll skip this part. It's not really relevant to what I'm talking about. But this just shows you, you know what all these things are? This is something called the Kuiper Belt. When they reclassified Pluto, and they said it's no longer a planet, it's now a Kuiper Belt object, KBO. It inhabits a range around the orbit of Pluto and a little bit beyond. They're called Kuiper Belt objects. There are billions and billions and billions of them. The Oort cloud is where our comets come from, particularly the long period comets that take about 200 years or so to do their revolution. You know what each of these billions and billions and billions and billions of objects are? Potential weapons in God's arsenal that sends striking down on this earth. It's been sitting there since the beginning of time. waiting for him to take his God finger and go, you know what? It's time for, and we're going to hear a little bit more about this when I get back to the next set of judgments. At some point, God's just going to say, hey, you, flick. And then that thing is going to come, and it's going to end up hitting the earth. And that's not going to be pretty. War, famine, things falling from the sky. I got to take a break. After this, I saw the 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or the sea or on any tree. And I saw another angel coming from the east, having the seal of the living God. He called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea, do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. So those of us, or those of them that are still Christians that are going to be around, now they're going to get some protection. In 2 weeks, we're going to see protection from what? And they're going to be happy to have that protection. Finish up with this. We get into Revelation 7. We talk about the 144,000. Some people claim it's a literal number. Most people don't. What this is these are people that are all going to be sealed. And they're all going to be, these are going to be basically former unbelievers that are going to come around. And they're going to come from the tribes of Israel. And so they're going to be Jews that wake up, according to this. This is where Jews are right now in the world. A good number are in Israel, but not all of them by any means. I mean, only half of the people that are of Jewish descent, 6 million out of about 14 million, live in Israel. They're in other places around here too, quite a contingent here. Now, when we talk about sealing of these things, I want to refer you back to Ephesians 3:6. This is Paul writes, "This mystery is that through the gospel the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel, members together of one body, and sharers together in the promise of Jesus Christ." So it's very possible when he talks about the sealing of the 144,000, we could just be considered just as much as part of that promise too. I don't know. I'm not really sure. So I'm just going to pretty much play it safe, and I'm going to start worshiping. I'm going to start believing right now. Then I don't have to worry about which way that it turns out. So now, all these countless people are saying salvation becomes to the Lord. We get back to the feast of our victory. Praise and glory and wisdom and thanks and honor and power and strength to our God forever and ever. And then comes the 7th seal. There you go. Dat sjunde inseklet amongst the Swedish intelligentsia. No, not that 7th seal. That's a fun-loving movie. Show it to the kids. A guy plays chess with the devil. Plays chess with death. Your kids will love it. It's a romp. No, the 7th seal, silence. It's a time of transition. It's a time of movement from not really very pleasant things to things that are going to get even worse. Consider this poor little guy. There's an article in this week's Wall Street Journal. The title of this article is something like "Sea Lions Are Displaced in California." So somebody found this little sea lion sitting in their flower pot. It's like, just imagine that. You look outside, you're picking up your morning paper, and there's this little seal with this big old eyes. Seals are right up there with otters, amongst my favorite animals. So there's this little seal sitting in your seal pot going, "Roof, roof, roof, roof." And I just saw that picture, and that just cracked me up. And so when you talk about seal judgments, well, that's a seal judgment right there. So next week, like I said, we go back to the 7 churches. David's up for you on that. Anybody have any comments or final thoughts at this point?
Just one little question.
Go ahead.
You said the 114th that would get will get protected with the seal on their forehead. That's not, you don't think that's meant for Christians, it was for Jews that will get that?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I think it's Christians personally.
Okay.
I mean, but it could just be Jews. I don't know. Okay. I tend to believe that that's going to be all the Christians, because that number 144,000, if you think about it, is not really very many when you look at what the population of the world is today. That would just be a drop in the ocean. And I think we're going to have a little bit more than that.
In Revelation, where they list the 12 tribes, those are not the 12 tribes of the Old Testament.
There is some difference. I was going to get into that. I talked too much and I stomped right over that.
So the 12, the 144,000 becomes a numbers game of 12 times 12, or 12 squared, which is 144, and 10 cubed, which is 1,000. And that's kind of a term for completeness.
Who would like to lead us in prayer next week?
In addition, we as Christians are grafted onto Israel through Christ. So
Absolutely.
we are Israel.
And that gets exactly back to the Ephesians verse, that we are together. We're along with the Jews, we're all there. And who said they were going to lead us in prayer?
I said that.
Oh, Jerome did. Okay, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and close. Dear Lord, as much as we don't like discussing these things, we always need to be prepared for them because they very well could be happening today. We don't know if that's the case, and so the prudent response on all of our behalves is to prepare as if they are actually happening and to be ready for those times when they come. Because you've told us in numerous places you will come as a thief in the night. And so since we never know when the thief is going to come, we also never know when you're going to come back. We always need to be prepared. So as always, send your Holy Spirit to guide us and to lead us. Send your Holy Spirit to open our hearts to not only understand what it is you would have us do, but to have us take that knowledge and to spread that knowledge, because you didn't give it to us for us to keep it to ourselves. You gave it to us in order that we do your work here on this earth. You told that to the disciples when you ascended into heaven. That promise is still with us today. So as we go forth into this world, have us open our hearts and our minds to the opportunities they present us. We need to be prepared for those just as much as anything else. All this we ask in your name. Amen. As always, thank you for your attention. And hopefully see most of you next week after this.